Okay. So good evening. This is time is ticking. This is CAGNE's environmental campaign. Time is ticking started 3 years ago, and we run them alongside whenever COP takes place, and obviously we're at COP 28 currently. This is talk 3, and last year we tried a In Conversation event, and it went down really well. So we're delighted this evening that we have Steve Clarke with us, and we are going to have a chat about airport expansion and why it's big enough, but also Steve's background and why he feels so passionately about what aviation impact is having on our planet. And as we said in our intro for this whole 2023, CAGNE has to ask, is time really ticking when it comes to aviation and the gimmicks that are being put forward, as we saw with the Virgin flying on sustainable aviation fuel? It's just not feasible in the commercial world. So we really have to start asking serious questions of those in power and of policy, obviously. So we had hoped that Lisa Morris would be conducting this evening, had change of face. Unfortunately, she's gone down with COVID. There seems to be a lot of it about at the moment. And so I'm afraid it's down to me to lead us through tonight's talk. But I'm going to pin Steve to the front so that you can see our speaker, and I shall ask questions as we go along. Okay, so Steve, thank you ever so for joining us this evening. We're very appreciative of you giving up your time, as we are with all our speakers. Now, the topic you've chosen for your talk is Let's Talk UK Airport. Airports are big enough. And I think that encapsulates a whole can of worms. So I think where I'm going to start from this evening is to ask you to introduce yourself in who you are, what you are, and what makes you so passionate about this subject.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. So actually, you talk about COP. I first got really involved in environmental matters through, I forget what number it was, but it was the COP that was in Copenhagen in 2009. And I went to that COP. I got the train. It's called the COP train, trundled across Northern Europe and deposited us in Copenhagen. And it was a disaster, complete, unmitigated, total disaster. It didn't achieve anything. The protesters, of whom I was kind of not really one at that stage, had a lot of violence against them by police in Copenhagen. It was absolutely terrible. So I kind of got I got really interested and committed after that, and I think it made me realize that it made me have a lot less. I didn't really think it was possible to achieve that much through that very high level negotiation. And actually, I thought the way to achieve things is through ground from the ground up. So I've been involved in, excuse me, I've been involved in quite a lot of community projects since then. I was a Green Party councillor in Bristol. I live in Bristol, although I was in London for a long time. And in December 2018, Bristol Airport applied, put in a planning application to expand to 12 million passengers from 10 million passengers. Now, I know that doesn't sound much in terms of the Gatwick numbers, but it was a lot in terms of Bristol. And just to put that, give you some kind of context of what that is. I don't know how many of you know Bristol, but it's a very traffic congested, quite there's a lot of traffic trundling around Bristol every day. And if you took all of the traffic in Bristol, that emits 500,000 tons of carbon a year into the atmosphere. So just keep that figure in mind for a moment. The expansion of Bristol Airport, the expansion they were planning, is 1 million tons. So it kind of knocks everything else out of the water. It almost makes everything else, recycling save 20,000 tons a year in Bristol. As I've just said, the airport is 1 million tons of carbon. So it became, it's kind of a carbon monster. And we decided, a group of us decided to try and stop the planning permission, try to object to the planning permission.
Was there a group already in Bristol? Was there already sort of some climate action in Bristol?
Yeah, Extinction Rebellion are quite strong in Bristol. There's quite a few existing groups. It's a pretty woke city, I suppose you would say, to use the pejorative term. So yeah, there was a number of existing campaigns going on, and there was some small campaigns around Bristol Airport, mainly concerned with local people concerned with noise and congestion. We were concerned with climate, really, and so we started up the campaign in December 2018. We thought it'd be a 6-month campaign, and we're still going, basically. So it's been a very long campaign. We were successful at the local level, so the local planning committee turned it down. We got 11,000 comments on the planning website, which is completely unprecedented. 84% against. So most people are very much against it. All the local councils, all the local politicians, including the local MPs, were against the plans. So we were successful locally. The airport then appealed to the planning inspectorate, and we had I think it was 10 or 11 week public inquiry, which we had a full legal team and a team of experts representing us.
So how did you come about financing that? Because that's always a really difficult one, is actually funding these legal challenges, which really residents shouldn't have to do, but it seems that we have to.
To be honest, that was one of the things I was most worried about, because we're talking about initially the funds we raised were about 25,000. And I was very worried about that. I thought we'd never be able to do it. But actually, people are amazingly generous. And we raised money from, I think 350 people donated to that initial fundraiser. And we raised the money in about 2 weeks. That was sort of the least of our problems.
That's incredible.
Yeah. We also found solicitors, Lee Day, and counsel Estelle DeHon, who's KC, who were very helpful in helping us work out the money. They were extremely flexible. So that the money was nothing like the problem I thought it would. I mean, I'm not sure it's always going to be like that, but actually, over time, we've raised over £100,000 in total, because although we won initially, the airport won the appeal. And we then brought out a judicial review in the High Court against that appeal, because we said the procedure was wrong. We lost that High Court action. We then went to the Court of Appeal, and we were rejected from the Court of Appeal. So the legal costs were stacking up the whole way, but that wasn't such a major problem for us.
Are you personally liable for those legal costs?
Now, there's something rather wonderful called the Aarhus Convention. Aarhus is, again, a town in Denmark. And what that means, if you're a community group or an environmental group, and you're bringing an action against a major company, if you lose, the costs against you are limited to £10,000. So normally, if you lose in litigation, I used to be a litigation lawyer, so I kind of know about this stuff. If you lose in litigation, you have to pay the other side's costs, whatever they are. In this kind of action with judicial review, your costs, your adverse costs, as they're called, are limited to £10,000. So it's still a lot, but it's not unlimited, and you know what the worst case scenario is.
No, that's I mean, that's good news to know, because that's one of the biggest fears a lot of residents face, is if they want to challenge these big companies, is that the pockets are deep, and if you lose, then what can you lose? I mean, it frightens a lot of people against actually taking action.
Yeah, it is. There are large amounts of money, but they are your cost exposure is limited.
Mm.
And as I say, we found it relatively easy to raise the money. So I wouldn't. I think my advice would be not to say I'm not going to start this action because I'm worried about the costs. The other thing is the lawyers do things like something called a contingency fee, which is effectively no win, no fee. But not if they don't win, or if you don't win, they only charge you a limited amount of costs. So they're very they're very flexible, I would say, and I wouldn't let costs be the thing that stopped you.
What process did Bristol go through? Was this a normal planning application, or was this a DCO, a development consent order? What planning route did they go down? And did they use the government policy of making best use of existing runway?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there, but first off, the process that you've got in Gatwick is a different process from the one we had in Bristol. Bristol wasn't. I think it's called nationally important infrastructure is the phrase, or something like that. Gatwick is. Bristol wasn't. So Bristol effectively had a normal planning process in front of a normal committee. And a key thing here, really, the government decided not to get involved in Bristol at all, and they can choose to do that. What you're doing, which is DCO, Development Consent Order, the government are automatically involved. So there's good things and bad things about that. But yeah, so it is a different process. DCO is a relatively new process, and people are still sort of discovering the nuts and bolts of it, I would say. So you're one of the early ones. I think Luton are going, aren't they, at the moment? But I think other than that, you're going to be the next one. Manston, which is an airport in Kent, have been through the process, but I think those might be the only two that have been through the process. Your process, the process you're going to go through, is mainly using written documents.
Yes.
The process we went through was very much more like a trial you might see on television with cross-examination, and that made it, in a way, that made it more difficult because the airport had sort of top barristers, and they're used to making mincemeat of witnesses if they want to, and there was some quite some people had really quite hard times giving evidence.
Were they qualified experts that they gave a hard time to, or were they individuals?
We had, in total in the inquiry, there was about 9 or 10 experts. We had 3. Yeah, they certainly gave a hard time to the experts, but we also had a week where the public were giving evidence. And there was one instance I remember where there was one of the local councillors was given evidence, and the QC, as he was then, KC now, absolutely destroyed her, and she ended up in tears. Actually, very unfair, very unfair. So the answer is it depends on the individuals involved, but the process you're going through, I think, will be less confrontational.
Yeah, a development consent order is mostly written until they decide to take witness statements, if they decide to, in person, and have public hearings. Yeah. So you touched on that you have a legal background. Do you think that's assisted you with the Bristol campaign?
Well, I'm not a planning lawyer, but I did do litigation. So what it meant, it was kind of, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and it meant that I kind of knew more about law than the rest of my group. So I sort of acted as almost like a liaison officer, so trying to understand and explain the processes, because some of it's very legal. And you mentioned MBU, making best use. we spent a week, literally a week, arguing about the meaning of this government policy, which we say, and I think this is right, is completely out of date. And so there were some parts of the inquiry that were very legalistic, and I found myself often trying to understand it myself, then trying to explain it to my team. So yeah, it was an advantage, but people had too high expectations, perhaps, of my legal knowledge in this particular area.
So did you actually come to any conclusions? Was it purely that you felt that the current policy making best use of existing runways is lacking what you're passionate about, which is climate change?
Well, there was three main problems, and these are all potentially relevant. There's three main problems. The first one, and actually this one might be less relevant to you, but the inspectors decided that the emissions from aeroplanes could only be considered at a national level, so they couldn't be taken into account locally. But unfortunately for us, the Secretary of State, who was Michael Gove, refused to get involved. So what that meant is that the carbon emissions were never considered by anybody, which is kind of mad. Right, so that was number one. Number two, you will know, and I'm sure a number of people listening in will know about the non-CO2 effect of aviation. So what this is all the other gases other than carbon, often come in from visible in contrails, for example. Now, everybody recognizes that these have an impact, and what people do is they apply a multiplier. So the government say they take the carbon amounts and they multiply it by 1.9, and they say that's the total impact of that piece of aviation. Some people say the multiplier should be as high as 3 or maybe even more, but there's consensus around the fact that this is a huge problem, the non-CO2 gases. So the inspectors in our case, they said, well, we understand that there's a problem, but we don't really know how big the problem is. We don't know if the multiplier should be 1.9 or 2 or 3. We don't really know what it should be. Therefore, we're going to completely ignore it.
So they ignored climate change.
They ignored climate change and they ignored non-CO2 gases.
Do you think that is something going forward, that they're going to ignore it because of that policy in everything?
There's a possibility that might happen. So that could happen in Gatwick, although because Gatwick is such a big application, I think that's the basic thing. The basic problem with all these, there's about 20 airports who have currently got plans to expand in the UK, is if they all expand, there's no chance of us hitting our legally binding net zero target 2050. Nobody is doing a cumulative impact assessment. Nobody's adding, they're saying, okay, Bristol, you can expand. Okay, Luton, you can expand. But nobody's actually saying, well, if all these airports expand together, this is going to blow all our legally binding targets out the window. And that's one of the things we're campaigning for in this national campaign that is, we're just starting up. You've been involved in. That's one of the things we're campaigning for, that they need to take account of the cumulative impact.
So, I mean, for a lot of people listening in, that's shocking that they don't add all this expansion up to find a final figure, especially as Heathrow's new CEO is looking to actually progress Heathrow now. So tell us about this new campaign. What's it called?
It's called, rather unimaginatively, really, No Airport Expansion! And it really arose because there's lots of groups like yours is a big group, but there's a lot of smaller groups around the country who have been slaving away trying to resist for example, in Liverpool, there's a one-man group trying to resist their local airports expanding. And they're not really talking, they haven't really been talking to each other. They haven't really been meeting up. They haven't been, using each other's resources. So a group of us, including guys from Bristol and AEF, who are very helpful NGO, have put together are putting together a national campaign. We had a meeting in October, and as you know, at a meeting in October, there's about 24, 25 different groups, some NGOs, some quite big charities like Possible, who have agreed to come together to support each other, to give the campaigners more resilience, because it's hard work, you know. Particularly during COVID, it was really, really hard work. You really need support from people. So that's one of the main aims, is just to give each other, not just, but to give each other support, but also to try and get the planning laws changed. And the reason we're doing it now, I'm the coordinator of the campaign. The reason we're doing it now is because we've got an election next year. And the one time, I mean, I know this because I was a local politician myself, the one time that politicians listen to you is in the 12 months before an election. So there's a particular sweet spot right now where we potentially can get, what we're trying to do effectively is get planning law changed, get making best use updated, and get planning law changed through political.
So for those that don't know, the government policy of 2014 was making best use of existing runways, and the planning law doesn't take into account climate change.
That's largely true. The problem with making best use, it was written and drafted before our commitment to net zero, which was, I think, 2018, I think, or 2018. So it was written before that. So effectively, it's out of date, because it was the parameters for it were using a different target. So it's out of date. It needs updating, basically. And we're hoping, I mean, who knows? You know, it could be a Labour government. We're certainly talking to lots of the Labour, what we hope, people we think are going to be decision makers, and we hear that there isn't really going to be anything in the manifestos, probably any of the manifestos, but we're aiming to push this issue up the priority list when we get, you know, when and if we get a new government.
So there's two avenues that this new campaign is going to focus on. One is the planning law, and one is government policy.
And the third is to provide support for the groups, to increase resilience within the groups.
So is that feeding information between groups, networking, sharing what experiences, and how to conquer, if you like, these big organisations called airports?
Yeah, because what they're doing, I mean, I've been involved in a number of these inquiries now, and it's the same people representing the airport, the same consultants, who stretch credibility. I mean, I'll give you an example. In the Bristol Airport inquiry, there was a public health expert, you know, lots of letters after his name, very experienced, stood up and gave evidence and came to the conclusion that these extra 28,000 planes a year would make the local people healthier. So this guy is going around all of these inquiries and giving the same evidence. They're the same. So we need to understand that as a group. We need to understand that, because I know a lot of the questions you're going to be asked in Gatwick. I know Gatwick is a different situation, but I think, having been through what we've been through and understanding the experts that were up against us, that we can help you in advance with a lot of the issues they're going to raise. Because, yeah.
So when you lost, why go to the High Court? What motivates you? What made you believe that you could actually challenge it in High Court? Because obviously, you know, the calculator's going on the funds here. What was the real crunch of that reason?
Two things, really. We were advised that we had a serious chance of winning, and actually, it was, looking at the judge's written judgment, it was quite close. So that was number one. But number two, delay is our friend.
Okay.
So the whole time we're delaying, you know, as I said, this planning application was made in December 2018. It's only just gone through. That's 1 million tons of carbon a year we're saving. So it's 4 million tons of carbon we've saved. So, you know, I mean, that is a lot.
That's a headline.
Yeah. So although people say you lost, actually, I don't think we did lose. You know, we've informed lots of people about the issue. We've saved a load of carbon, and out of what we did has grown this national campaign. So you can lose but win, if you see what I mean.
So a lot of people will think, well, why don't you just, you know, grow some wildflowers in your garden? And what motivates you? Because I know I spend a lot of time looking at my computer, reading very, very complex documents on aviation and finding all the missing bits that they've left out. But what motivates you? What makes you want to do this?
I suppose ultimately it's a sense of injustice. I mean, you'll know these figures. You know, less than 20% of the population of the world has flown. And the people that haven't flown are the people who are getting the most impacts. I mean, you imagine the people in Bangladesh, for example. You know, Bangladesh is literally going underwater. How many of those people fly? Well, not very many. And although right now aviation is a relatively small percentage of the emissions, of the world's emissions, the graph is going up. Everything else is getting decarbonized, electricity and so on. You know, lots of transport is getting decarbonized. Those graphs, almost all the graphs actually are going that way. Aviation is going that way. So by 2050, it's going to be a huge percentage of the budget is going to be taken up by flying. And that just isn't right. You know, that really just isn't right. So we've kind of got stubborn about it, and we've dug in, and we decided to campaign. And over the 4 years, we've learned an awful lot about aviation that we didn't know before. You know, the tricks of the industry. Typical trick, and I'm sure you'll get this as well. Bristol Airport says we're going to be a carbon neutral airport by 2030. Fantastic. Everybody says that. The trouble is, it doesn't include the planes or the cars. So what it means is they've got LED light bulbs. But it's so misleading. They're using the same playbook pretty much as the tobacco industry used and as the climate deniers used. You can see the thread running through the various campaigns. They find experts who will be prepared to say whatever they want them to say if they pay them enough money. And these people sort of move around the country almost in packs, going to these inquiries. That's why I think it's important that we become a pack, a defensive pack, so we can share information. So
do you think that there is a role for community groups to become lobbyists? Because obviously aviation have companies they employ to lobby government policy, etc., and have access to elected members. So is your new campaign aiming to become a lobbying campaign?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The aviation is a very powerful industry. I mean, it's the wrong side of history. You know, if in 20 years' time, it won't look like it is now. It's a question of how quickly we can make that happen. But you talk about lobbying. It's true they can lobby MPs, but the other people who can lobby MPs are local people who live in the constituency. As you probably know, MPs will generally only listen to their own constituency members. So part of the campaign, part of what we're hoping to do is to get the regional groups, the 20-odd regional groups, to organise people locally to put pressure on their MPs. And we hope and think that's going to be an effective strategy, particularly with the change of government coming on. Yeah.
So the manifestos, that doesn't give us much hope. If you believe the manifestos of all the political parties, obviously the Green Party is anti aviation growth. But the key ones, obviously, are the Conservatives, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats. What role, when it comes to the elections, can residents play?
Well, they can. Number one, they can ask, particularly if they live in near one of these airports that's expanding. They can ask the MPs to nail the colours to the mast and say what they actually think about it. And if they say, well, we support the airport expanding, which of course they're entitled to say that, if they say we support the airport expanding, then they need to tell other residents locally that that's the case. Because often MPs, particularly who live near airports, they're reluctant because of business connections, because of other connections, they're quite reluctant to object to airports expanding. So we really need to, I think one of the aims we've got is all the MPs that are local to airports, we want to find out what they think. And if they refuse to answer us, or refuse to give us a clear answer, then we'll say, well, fine, thank you very much. And we will spread that word locally that they've been unable to condemn or to object to the airport. So therefore, you can only presume they're in favour. As I say, we are in a real sweet spot because of the election.
Mm. You mentioned a key thing there, business. Airports are seen to employ a lot of people, and they also bring economic benefits to the local communities. How can you counter these businesses who are so pro aviation, so pro their local airport?
In Bristol, we actually went round and asked a lot of businesses what they thought about the airport expanding. The Chamber of Commerce stood up and gave evidence and said all our members are in support of this. And we said, well, have you actually asked them? And of course, they hadn't asked them. And we got a letter that was signed relatively quickly by, we put together a letter that was signed by 120 businesses who said, and this is all we're saying actually, Bristol Airport is big enough. We're not trying to close it down. We're just saying it's big enough. So when you actually talk to businesses, it's not as clear cut as it seems. The other thing about jobs and airports is it's grossly exaggerated how many jobs come out of airport expansion. I mean, Singapore Airport, for example, is almost completely automated. There's no baggage handlers. The only jobs are in coffee shops, basically, which is fine, but it's not fantastic, high-powered engineering jobs that are created. It's relatively low-paid, zero-hours contract jobs. So the aviation industry, and there's been a number of reports, NEF, who are a consultancy, have recently done a report where they went through a business case for an airport, and they showed that the parameters were completely wrong, and because of that, the results were vastly exaggerated. The other thing is we need what people call a just transition. We need to understand that if the aviation industry does have to get smaller, then the people who have been working in it need to be helped to transition into jobs where they can use those skills, and that is absolutely possible. I mean, I think around Gatwick there was a lot of work done during COVID with people transitioning into other jobs. Mm. That work is going on worldwide, actually.
Mm. Yeah, I think a lot of people who were laid off by airports found they could find better salaries and better hours in other jobs than at the airport. And so I'm sure, it's not only at Gatwick that there is a real lack of unemployment surrounding it. And so they actually struggle to find jobs or workers, for jobs. The one thing that I guess I perhaps will touch on with you is because having met some of your group in London, you had youngsters amongst your group who were opposing airport expansion. That's quite a rarity, seeing youngsters campaigning to oppose airport expansion. So how, I mean, are they unique, or do you have a different youngsters in your area? Because apparently it's really cool to fly, it's trendy, that's what you should do because all celebrities fly. You know, we have a real culture problem about flying.
I think it's um, I think it's become less cool, actually. I think if people go off to Goa for the weekend for a rave, they're less quick to talk about it. I
Oh.
mean, you will know in Sweden there's something called flight. I think it's called flight shaming is the literal translation. Well, I'm not too keen on that name, but anyway. And they raised awareness about flying, and over a course of 2 years, flight went down I think 12 to 15%, and the local airports didn't expand. So I think it's not inevitable that flying is seen as cool. And actually, what I'm hearing is, because particularly in Europe, train journeys are becoming much more accessible and comfortable, that lots of people are traveling by train and enjoying the trip. I mean, who enjoys going to Gatwick or Bristol or Heathrow? It's a nightmare.
Mm,
I'm old enough to remember when it was quite cool. It was quite luxurious,
mm,
but it's not now. It's like it's like being in a cattle pen.
yeah.
So I think one of the big problems though with alternative travel is the cost.
Mm,
I think Greenpeace did a study recently where they compared the cost of railway journeys to flying, and it's I think 3 or 4 times more expensive generally. I went to Barcelona recently on the train. It was 350 quid, and I could have flown for 80 quid. So I mean, I was able to do that, but lots of people can't.
mm,
But just to be completely clear about this, the people who take one family holiday a year and take their kids off to Spain, they're not the people we're really trying to get at. Well, the people we're trying to get at are number one, the government to do some demand management, but number two, the people that are taking 8, 9, 10 flights a year, they should have to pay for those flights. They should have to pay um, a proper amount of money. I mean, you'll know about the subsidies. No VAT on aircraft fuel. Why not? Where's the logic to that? You and I are paying more VAT, when we go to the petrol station than EasyJet are.
mm,
Why is that? Why should the subsidies happen like that?
mm. Yeah, I think just recently 52 million has been pledged, hasn't it, to sustainable aviation fuel by government, which to make it mandatory by 2030. Um, so yeah, more money that could be going to other areas of
You
perhaps.
want to talk about you want to talk about sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, please do. I mean, obviously, that is another argument that you will face in campaigning for no airport expansion, is that the technology is coming, sustainable aviation fuel is coming, hydrogen is coming. So yeah, please do. How will you counter those?
So sustainable aviation fuel, the industry's best estimate is that there'll be sustainable aviation fuel in about 8 or 10% of planes by 2030. The thing about sustainable aviation fuel, it's a wonderful name. The aviation industry have got some great minds coming up with this name. It's more sustainable in how it's made, although it often uses land that should be used for growing food. But let's say it's more sustainable how it's made. But the stuff that comes out the back of the engine is exactly the same. Exactly the same carbon, exactly the same non-CO2 gases. And people don't realize that. It's not sustainable in that it doesn't push out all this carbon. It's just a little bit more sustainable in the way it's made. So it's going to have a tiny impact around the edges. I mean, the government are using it as a guilt-free flying trip. That's what they're trying to do. Electric planes, yeah, electric planes are great, but the batteries have to be huge. And what that means is that for local flights with small planes, 8 or 10 people, you can imagine there will be electric planes, but they're not going to be carrying you down to Spain with 150 people at any time soon. That's not going to happen. Hydrogen planes, hydrogen is all around us. It's a incredibly potentially useful stuff. The trouble is you have to huge energy to turn it into something useful, into a fuel. The fuel itself would take up probably half the plane, and you have to refigure all of the airports would have to be reconfigured their infrastructure to deal with hydrogen. Again, it could potentially help us around the edges. Sorry, just one more thing about that. The other thing about all these new technologies, when EasyJet buy a plane, it's basically got a design life of 20 years plus. So that plane is going to be flying for 20 years. So the amount of time it will take us to change our fleet to a, quote, more sustainable fleet it's too long. It's way, way too long. So these techno fixes I'm not against them. Well, sustainable aviation fuel I'm not too keen on, but the other ones I'm not against them, but they're not going to save us. In the last 20 years, I'm sorry to bombard you with stats, in the last 20 years, efficiency improvements have meant about 1% less emissions a year. Great. The trouble is, increase in passenger numbers has been 2 or 3% a year. So any improvement is completely outdone because of the extra passengers.
So the government say that people want to fly. How do we counter that? People want to fly. People want to go on holiday. How are we going to stop all these people wanting to fly? And that's why they need to expand.
Just to be clear, I don't really want to stop all these people flying. If people want to go to Spain with their families once a year, that's fine. I've got no problems with it. People want to fly. I mean, lots of people commute from Bristol to Dublin, for example, every week. They should have to pay the right price. And if they take 2 or 3 flights, fine. If they take 8 or 9 flights, there should be a levy, a frequent flyer levy put on their tickets. The subsidy should be removed. There's no reason that people should get subsidies to fly. Put the money into land transport. Put the money into trains. That's what we should be doing. So those are the things that the government should be doing, and the government should not, absolutely not, allow airports to expand. We're never going to hit our target if airports expand.
So it's a real culture change that we need, rather than encouraging more people to fly.
Yeah, and it's happening elsewhere. It's happening in other areas of the economy, very quickly. Electricity's being decarbonised. Lots of people are buying electric cars, but it's not happening in aviation, in part because aviation is a very difficult industry to decarbonise. And therefore they think they should have sort of special treatment. Well, okay, but they shouldn't have loads of money thrown at them, the subsidies they're getting. There's no, I can't see a just reason why that should happen. Doesn't make sense to me, really.
Okay, so just going back to your campaigning to oppose Bristol, you appeared in lots of the local newspapers. How did you get the press coverage? How did you cope with that media stardom, as it were?
Well, local press, as you know, I'm going to be a bit rude about local press now, so forgive me if there's any local press people on. Well, no, not rude exactly. There's been lots and lots of redundancies. Lots of reporters have been made redundant. And what that means is that if you could put together a press release, which is written in sort of reasonable English with a couple of quotes from people, they will often just publish it verbatim. That was our experience. BBC and ITV, we developed relationships with the local newscasters. And whenever there was a development, they knew the people to contact. So that was about developing relationships. Bristol Airport refused to engage with us, so we kept asking them to appear with us on various programs, and they actually refused because they knew that their arguments were largely specious. So it was, yeah, I mean, and also we had a group of 3 or 4 people. We spread the media out between us. because people get bored with looking at the face of a white middle-aged old man. People get bored with it. So we had some younger people, some young women, some people who were very media friendly, understood how the media worked.
Good. Excellent. Okay, so we've got sort of just less than 15 minutes. I'm just going to open and ask for questions from the audience, if I can. If you want to just raise your electronic hand to ask a question, that would be great, of Steve, about his campaigning and about the new campaign. Is there anyone that wants to ask any questions? No electronic hands going on. Okay. No? Okay. So you're back in the spotlight, I'm afraid, Steve. So where do you go from here? What's your next step?
We're doing a few things. We've got a local project. We've been supported by Bristol and Bath universities, where you'll know this, but other people may not. So when Bristol Airport, for example, were granted planning permission. With that permission comes conditions. So they're allowed a certain number of night flights, 4,000 night flights, for example, a year. But who's counting? Answer: the airport are counting their own. They're marking their own homework. So our friends in Leeds and Bradford, Galba, who are a campaigning organisation there, they actually counted, and they found that Leeds Bradford Airport did 800 night flights over their quota, right? So that kind of got us thinking about this. So every time a plane takes off or lands, it goes past a transponder, which counts it. So the information is publicly available about how many flights there are, how many night, what time, and so on and so forth. But it's very difficult to get. So we've developed a website which we're launching next week or the week after, which has just got 3 simple dials, and it just registers how many flights there were yesterday, how many flights there were, and the times of the flights. So it's a way of people keeping track of their local airport. And actually, we just done a sort of pre-launch, but campaigners at Amsterdam Airport rang me up yesterday and say, "What a great idea! Can we have it as well?" Which, of course, is going to be a open source piece of software that everybody can use. So that's quite an interesting little project that's been going on. Apart from that, I mean, personally, I'm spending quite a bit of time trying to get the national campaign going. I'm trying to get engaged with MPs and decision makers. We're probably going to have we're planning to have an event in the House of Commons around about March next year, if there isn't an early election. So yeah, we're keeping pretty busy, and yeah, it's quite exciting, really quite an exciting time. So
will you produce your own manifesto for your new campaign that can actually go to the decision makers?
Yeah. So there's 2 things really. There's a sort of 1-page manifesto which says what our aims are, which is largely what I've outlined here. And then there's a bigger, a longer document, which is as you know, we gave evidence to the 2 MPs of the APPG last year, and I produced some longer evidence of what I thought was wrong with the planning system and took it to that committee. So there'll be 2 things. There'll be a 1-page document, and there'll be a longer document explaining the reasoning behind the shorter document. So yeah, it will be a manifesto, and I've been working on it, and that should be coming within the next week.
Gosh, keeping a busy person.
Yeah, I'm kind of retired in theory, but the only difference with being retired is you still work just as hard, but you just don't get paid.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that hats off to you. That there are a lot of people out there who will just retire and think, I can't do anything to change this. So it needs people such as yourself to actually try and change things, and to actually raise and question things that you feel passionately about. And you obviously do feel passionately about it. And that obviously came through Bristol, the expansion of Bristol. So when does Bristol actually get to go ahead with their growth plans?
There's the other weird thing about aviation that people don't know, and I don't know if this is the same in Gatwick, but Bristol Airport basically make all their money from car parking. They don't make any money from the planes at all. They make all the money from car parking. So the first thing they're doing is they're building a multi-story car park on greenbelt land adjacent to the airport. That's their starting point, because that's where they make all their money. They're basically a car park with an airport attached. So they said they're going to start that soon. Where there's a very big Extinction Rebellion and sort of non-violent direct action people around in Bristol, and there could be some non-violent direct action around that. Many of our campaigners, our strongest campaigners, have come out of, or perhaps are involved in, Extinction Rebellion as well. We've got a real mixture of people from sort of local grannies who were worried about the noise, to Extinction Rebellion people who were worried about the sort of coming apocalypse as they see it. And that mixture is a strength.
So how big is your committee then?
The committee, there's 8 of us on the committee.
Oh, I think you've frozen. Are you still with us, or have you frozen, Steve? I think we've lost him. He seems to. Oh, you froze for a moment.
Oh, did I find? Did you hear what I said? There's a wider group of about I think about 8 or 9,000, but there's 300 quite active people who we consult with about when we're doing a document, for example, we'll consult with those, kind of a user group, a focus group.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, all right. So, well, thank you ever so. There's messages coming in from Lisa, which is great. That Gatwick are currently building a 5 or 9 story car park, robotic, and one of the key things that a lot of the hedge funds view airports as shopping malls, and the runways and additions. So we also seen at Gatwick that the second runway, or the new runway, they're already developing their new shopping mall in the northern terminal. And Sharon kindly says, no questions because tonight's session was informative and thought-provoking. So that's really nice to hear. So thank you, Sharon, for that one. We've got 6 minutes to go. So what I think I'm going to do is just touch on the fact that CAGNE is very supportive of your new campaign, and wanting, will actively play a role in it. We were involved in No Airport Expansion back in 2015 when it was Heathrow versus Gatwick, and we didn't support any airport expansion then, and we continue with that as our ethos. But yes, with Gatwick, we do face a huge expansion plan, and Gatwick are changing their plans as we go through this, and they're about to launch a small consultation on changing their plans, and that mostly relates around one of the piers, but it also relates around their incinerator. So the incinerator is going, and it will be a waste sorting site, which means the traffic modelling is even more out of kilter, because there'll be lorries coming and going to add into that, which also then questions the air quality. And I think it's really interesting. The one thing that comes out of all airport expansion issues is the traffic that they create, and however much we see these, I call them fiction sustainable transport plans. Onward surface access is never an airport's problem, but it is the residents and it is the local authorities. And I think that's what we see and we hear loud and clear coming from the local authorities around Gatwick, is that the area just couldn't cope with fast expansion. Because with Gatwick, this is very much a second runway by the back door. So I think I think all 7 of your local authorities opposed Bristol, and yet they still got planning permission. Did they look to challenge?
Yeah, I mean,
challenge that at all?
no, not really, because this is the way the government policy works. I mean, basically, local democracy was trashed. I say, who's a Conservative MP, who's the airport's on his patch. He was against it. He made representations, came to nothing. So the sort of power of big business, if you like. I mean, weirdly, Bristol Airport is owned by Ontario Teachers Pension Plan.
Oh, okay.
Which is pension in the world, and they own 4 or 5 other airports in Europe. So we wrote to and engaged with lots of teachers in Ontario, and they were surprised and upset about what was happening. But I guess there's so much money involved that sort of overrode the objections. I mean, it's about money, really, isn't it? Largely, as far as the businesses are concerned, they're not concerned about local. They say they're concerned about local stakeholders, local residents. They really are definitely not concerned about local residents. They just want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in 2015 the CEO of Gatwick Airport was going to get a £5 million bonus if he managed to get that new runway. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the owners of Gatwick Airport, GIP, that's partly a Canadian pension fund.
Really?
So, yeah, so it is, unfortunately, it is big business, big money. And, you know, it's down to yourself and people like yourself who are causing these big businesses a little bit of aggravation, because we're saying, we don't want it. It's not good for us and it's not good for the planet. So, you know, more power to you, Steve, and good luck with your new campaign, which, as you know, CAGNE will be supporting you all the way, and be party to it. But I'm going to round up now because we've got 2 minutes to go, and just say a huge thank you for joining us this evening. This is our 3rd year of Time is Ticking. And CAGNE is the umbrella group for aviation and environment for Sussex, Surrey and Kent. And without the support of Friends of the Earth, and CAGNE is a climate action group and recognised climate action group with Friends of the Earth, these talks would not take place. So this session is recorded. The next session is on Monday. And if you haven't heard Alex Chapman of New Economics Foundation, which Steve did mention this evening, he will be joining us on Monday, along with Duncan Leslie, who is the Managing Director of Hever Castle. So we'll be talking about heritage and the impact on what the legacy we leave, as well as the economics and the economic impact on our planet on Monday evening. So please do look on our website. You can register there. And thank you so much. There is so many lovely comments coming in on the chat. So thank you ever so. And
sorry, just to say, I see somebody's asked to reach out and chat. I'm very happy if you give people my email address and they contact me. I'm delighted to help. And I must say, you've praised our campaign, but your campaign is absolutely brilliant as well. And you've been you guys have been going for a long time, so respect.
Thank you. You can tell I'm going great. But Steve, do you want to just put your airport expansion email address in the chat, and I can add it because everyone that attends any of these events, we will send out the YouTube link at the end of Time is Ticking. And I can include that email under this section, so that everyone can then contact you and ask you more questions. So thank you ever so. Thank you, Steve, and
Thanks.
thank you and good night.
Good night.